now we understand about the five kingdoms, it's time to break down probably our most people's favourite group, which are that of the animals. And we're going to classify animals in today's video, and then I'm going to send you off to create your own summary of the different vertebrate groups. So to begin with, let's look at the ways that we can classify animals. So when we group animals together, usually it's on structural features. So for example, these birds that you can see here, we've got a sparrow and a swallow and a hummingbird, and then this little finchy over here, they all have two wings, they all have feathers, they all have a beak, they all have two eyes that face forward, or they're on the sides of their head like here, and they all have a head to begin with. So all of those things group them together as being a bird. So to begin with, all animals can be classified into one of two groups. We can either call them a vertebrate, or we can call them a vertebrate or an invertebrate. So you can see right here, we've got the vertebrates. And this picture here is called a Venn diagram. I don't know if you've seen one before. It means that the stuff that's in this box over here is only in the vertebrates, and the stuff that's in this box over here on the right is only in the invertebrates. And then the stuff that's in the middle is stuff that is common amongst both. So these are all the features that we've talked about to do with animals so far. So they live on Earth, they're composed of cells, they have a nucleus, that's not written there. They are consumers, or the word that we've used is they are heterotrophs. They have a particular life cycle with birth, growth, reproduction, and then they die. But we're going to focus mostly on these guys, on the vertebrates. But then you can see that actually this is less than 10% of all the animals on Earth. And most of them are actually invertebrates. And I'll come back to them a little bit at the end. But in particular, we're going to focus on these five vertebrate groups. Before we get to do that, I get to teach you two new words. Whoa, two new words. So the first one of these new words is called an ectotherm. So an ectotherm is like a snake, and it has a body temperature. So this is its internal temperature here on the y-axis, or the tall one. It has an internal temperature that stays about the same as the external or the outside temperature. So you can see here that when it's about 10 degrees outside, you come up and you hit the line and you go across and you say it's about 10 degrees inside the animal. Same as when it's 40 degrees, you come up and then you come over here and you can see that it's about 40 degrees in the animal. So these animals, you may have once called them cold-blooded. But I want you to stop and I want you to think, why wouldn't I call these guys cold-blooded? Now what I'm hoping that you are thinking is that when the outside temperature is warm, their blood isn't cold at all. It's warm too. So cold-blooded is actually the wrong term for what we call now an ectotherm. So an ectotherm is an organism that has its body temperature that changes temperature at the same rate or with the environment. So the opposite of an ectotherm is going to be called something different. These are what you might have called your warm-blooded creatures. So these are endotherms. So endo meaning inside, therm meaning temperature. Ecto meant outside, meaning outside temperature. So these are like us. We are an endotherm. We stay at the same body temperature no matter what the outside temperature is, or as much as possible. If it gets very, very hot or very, very cold, we have to worry about it. But when it's about 20 degrees outside, or at the moment it might be closer to 10, you'll go up here and you'll see that the body temperature of this mouse or this human is going to be about the same. So it's going to be about 37 degrees if you're a human. Same as if it's 30 degrees, you come up and you can see the temperature is still 37 degrees. So that's pretty cool that we have our own regulated body temperature, and that's called endotherm, whereas snakes and some other creatures that we're going to be looking at, they are ectotherms, which means they regulate their body temperature using the environment. So let's jump in to the first of our five vertebrate groups. Can you guess what it is? Excellent. So I want you to pause and I want you to think about what kind of features do you think all of these organisms have in common, and what name are you going to give that group? So pause, give it a think. hopefully you've come back and you're like, oh, I'm going to call these guys fish. Good. So what kind of features do fish have in common? And this is what you're going to have to put on your poster. You're going to have to put details about each one of the 5 vertebrate groups that we're talking about. So the first one we're talking about is fish. The biggest thing with fish is that they live in water and they don't breathe using their lungs. They actually breathe using these guys over here called their gills. Gills don't work very well on land. The same that lungs don't work very well in water. So these guys live in water, so they have special breathing that enables them to do that. They also have some scales and fins. They lay lots of eggs. But the other really key important feature about fish that I want you to learn is that these guys are ectothermic. So thinking back to what ectothermic meant, these are the ones that body temperature changes with the temperature of the environment. And so that's what we know about fish. What's the next group going to be? I'm hoping that you were talking about these guys, which are the amphibians. So the amphibians include things like frogs and newts and salamanders. And I want you to have a look at them and see what have they got in common. So when we look at their characteristics, we start to talk about they're still part of this phylum Chordata, which means that they have a spinal cord. But these guys have started to move off of out of the water and on to land. Okay, so they have a few different features. They still lay eggs, and they actually need to return to water to lay their eggs. They have a moist skin versus the scales, like a fish. They also seem to have webbed feet, indicating that they can move quite well through water. But they have the first sets of lungs. So they can breathe through their lungs, they can breathe through their skin, or when they are tadpoles or the juvenile version, the larval version, then they can actually breathe through their gills as well. So they're very cool. So they're very similar to fish, except they've got some things that allow them to live on land. Which group do you think are going to come next? I'm hoping you're thinking about these guys, the reptiles. So snakes and chameleons and turtles and crocodiles and lizards. All of these are reptiles. What do they have in common? Have a look at their skin. Now, all of their skin is very, very scaly. So they have scales, they don't have fur. Their skin, though, is significantly more dry than the group of amphibians. But all 3 of these guys lay eggs. So these guys lay eggs. Their eggs have got a much harder, drier shell versus the amphibians that they're moist and they have to lay them in water. And then we also consider reptiles to be ectothermic, just like the amphibians and just like the fish. So all 3 of these guys have the ability to regulate their body temperature, or sorry, don't have the ability to regulate their body temperature. Their body temperature changes as the environmental temperature changes. But no more skin breathing, no more gill breathing. These guys exclusively breathe through lungs. All right, next group coming up. These guys, so pretty. Next time you go for a walk, go out there, use the Melbirds guide that we've put on Sector and have a look at some of the birds that are available in your local neighbourhood and what you might be able to see. I'm guessing you've probably seen some of these guys before, these pink galahs. You might get lucky and see a kookaburra. So what makes a bird a bird? A bird has the ability to lay eggs, like all of these guys. So that's not something that's different yet. They have feathers and wings, which, yes, that is different. But the biggest difference we have now is that these are our very first endotherms. They have the ability to maintain their own body temperature. They don't need the environment to do that. And now that means they can actually live in much more extreme environments. So you won't find reptiles that live in the Antarctic because it's too cold. They won't be able to get hot enough to function properly. So birds are endothermic, so you've got things like penguins that live in the Arctic and the Antarctic. So they're really valuable, is this ability to maintain your own body temperature, being endothermic. They also have the ability to breathe through lungs, which makes sense because they are terrestrial, and terrestrial is that word that we use for anything that lives on land. And so how many groups did I tell you there were in the phylum Chordata? There are 5. Our last lucky last one, this is the one that you probably love a lot, is we've got the mammals. So what makes a mammal a mammal? Does it you have to live on land to be a mammal? Thinking about dolphins and whales. Do you have to have legs to be a mammal? Or can you not have wings? No, because we've got bats. So what is it that makes a mammal so special? Now, what I want you to think about is where that word comes from, mammal. So mammals have the ability to give their milk to their young via their mammary glands. So their mammary glands are usually contained in breast tissue, and this allows the mother to directly feed her young. So that's probably the biggest difference that we've got here. There's one other huge difference between a mammal and a bird. We're both endothermic. You can see that here. The mammals are endothermic. We both breathe through our lungs. But what is different is the fact that we give birth to live young. So birds lay eggs, but mammals give birth to live young. And that's what makes them extra special. So anything that doesn't fall within one of those 5 vertebrate groups, so you could be a fish, an amphibian, a reptile, a bird, or a mammal. If you don't fall in one of those 5 groups, then you're classified as an invertebrate. And that means most likely your skeleton is no longer on the inside of your body, your skeleton is on the outside of the body. So you could have an external skeleton, like a lot of insects, arachnids, we've got crustaceans, all of those guys have an external hard covering, no internal bones, or you could even have no skeleton at all. So an annelid, which is a type of worm or a mollusk, like this snail here, or even a squid, they don't have any external skeleton. They don't have any internal skeleton. A squid has a tiny bit of what you might consider a skeleton, but worms, snails, they're all no skeleton at all. So that's the end of the core bit of this video. If you would like, though, I'm going to talk about 2 special mammal groups, so you can stay tuned and we'll go through those. But these ones won't be assessed on your test. So the last 2 groups that I'm going to talk to you about are the marsupials and the monotremes. So we said that all mammals gave birth to live young, but that's where we've got one exception. We've got one exceptional little group here, and we've only a handful of animals that fit into that group. But marsupials and eutherians, which are us, or formerly we were called placentals because we have a placenta, we have the ability to give birth to live young, and all of these special mammals, all of these special mammals in particular, we all have the ability to feed our young milk. So let's have a look at the first group. These are the marsupials, nice fluffy little creatures. We've got kangaroos, we've got possums. They're pretty much all exclusively in Australia. Sometimes you find some in the Americas, like the opossums and potoroos. There's also a group called the Tassie Devils are also a marsupial, and what makes them different is this bit here. So you can see right here there's a little joey poking out of mum's pouch. Now that pouch is what makes you a marsupial. Normally, say humans, for example, or gorillas or elephants, we're pregnant for a really long time and we give birth to an almost fully formed baby. What happens with a kangaroo is they give birth to this tiny little thing that's like this. It's like a little rat-like pink creature. It doesn't have the ability to hear or see or do anything like that. And it can climb its way up and into the pouch, and it does the finishing part of its growing in a pouch, and that's what makes it a marsupial. The final group that you may have heard of, these guys are your platypus and about 4 species of echidna. So those 4 species of echidna and those platypi, what makes them different and what makes them a monotreme is the fact that they don't give birth to live young. They actually give birth to eggs. They lay eggs. Yeah? But what makes them a mammal still is because they still feed their young milk. Okay, so because they have mammary glands and they feed their young milk, we classify them as mammals and not as birds or reptiles, even though they lay eggs. And so that is the end of my little video on the 5 vertebrate groups.